The woman in the shadows. The night was quiet, and the floor beneath Keanu's boots echoed with a calm rhythm as he walked through the dimly lit corridor of the luxurious hotel. Most guests had retired to their rooms, the lights had softened, and the staff had thinned out. It was the hour of silence, where the glimmer of wealth met the forgotten footsteps of those who kept it running. Keanu had just wrapped up a press event for a new indie film he'd quietly supported. The hotel had offered their presidential suite, but instead of heading there, he had slipped away from his manager and entourage, choosing to take the longer route around the service wing. He always did this, not out of curiosity but out of habit. He believed that the truth of any place didn't lie in its chandeliers, but in its back rooms, its kitchens, and its janitor closets. As he walked past the service area of the hotel, a strange sound reached his ears. It was not loud, but it didn't belong. It was a soft snore, fragile, almost childlike, coming from one of the employee restrooms. The door was slightly ajar, a strip of cold fluorescent light seeping into the hallway. Keanu paused, his brow furrowed. He stepped closer, slowly pushed the door open, and then stood still. Inside, a woman was curled up on the closed lid of a toilet seat, her head resting against the tiled wall. She was wearing a faded uniform, her shoes still on, her cleaning cart stationed just outside the door. Strands of silver and black hair clung to her face, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. It was a pitiful sight, not because she looked weak, but because she looked utterly exhausted, like someone who had carried the weight of 100 unspoken burdens and could no longer pretend it wasn't heavy. Keanu didn't say anything. He just stood there, overwhelmed by a sense of quiet sorrow. This wasn't a scene most people would ever see. Most would walk by, never noticing the human behind the labor. But Keanu saw her, and in that moment, something in him shifted. Not as a celebrity, not even as a man, but as a soul recognizing another soul in pain. He knelt down carefully and reached into his jacket for a blanket he had carried from the set earlier that day. He gently placed it over the woman's shoulders without waking her. Then he sat against the wall opposite the stall and waited. He didn't know why. Maybe because she deserved to wake up with kindness near her. Maybe because the world had too many people sleeping alone in places they were never meant to sleep. After nearly 20 minutes, the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them, and then panic surged across her face as she saw Keanu. She gasped, tried to stand quickly, but stumbled slightly from the fatigue. "No, please don't worry," Keanu said softly. "You were just resting. I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't mean to fall asleep," she stammered. Her voice was raspy, her accent thick with something Eastern European. "Please don't tell manager. I'll lose job. I have children." Keanu gently raised his hands. "I'm not going to tell anyone. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." The woman's hands shook as she brushed her uniform, trying to straighten herself. "I work double shift, cleaning all day and night. I didn't mean to sleep. Here, just needed to sit for 1 minute." He looked at her eyes, deep brown, filled with layers of survival, of pain swallowed without complaint. "What's your name?" he asked. "Milena," she replied, her voice quieter now, more ashamed. "Milena," Keanu repeated, letting the name settle in the air. "You've been working a long shift?" 14 hours today. Last week 16. It's okay. Just life." Keanu leaned his head back against the tile wall. "That's not just life, Milena. That's a fight. And you shouldn't have to fight so hard just to survive." Her lips trembled slightly, but she said nothing. Maybe she was used to silence. Maybe kindness scared her more than cruelty because it was so rare. After a few moments, she tried to return to her cart. "I need to finish this floor before 4. I clean guest suites. VIP stay here tonight." He stood up slowly. "Let me help." Milena blinked. "You? Help clean?" Keanu smiled gently. "Yes. I know how to scrub. Not as fast as you, I'm sure. But I can try." She stared at him like he was speaking in another language. "Why would you help me? You're in movies." "Because right now," he said, You're the star of this place, and stars shouldn't be left to fall." And with that, Keanu picked up a cloth, followed her to the suite she was supposed to clean next, and silently began helping. He didn't take photos. He didn't ask for gratitude. He just wanted her to feel seen, not as a cleaning lady, but as a woman who mattered. What he didn't know then was that Milena was hiding something much deeper than just exhaustion. Beneath the layers of hard work and silence was a truth that would soon come to light. A truth that would change everything for both of them. And as the night wore on, and the two of them cleaned side by side, Keanu could feel it. A quiet storm, waiting to rise. As Keanu opens one of the luxury suite closets to dust the shelves, he finds a locked metal box with Milena's name scratched faintly on the side, hidden in a place no guest should ever have touched. Milena's eyes widen in fear. Before Keanu can ask, she grabs it and whispers, "No one can see this, please, not even you." The box of silence, the silence inside the luxury suite, deepened the moment Keanu's hand brushed against the cold metal of the locked box. It had been tucked behind an old stack of decorative linen inside the closet, clearly not meant to be found. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small toolbox, but it was heavy and old. Its surface scratched and worn, as if it had been dragged across years of suffering. What struck Keanu most was not the object itself, but the way Milena reacted, the instant her eyes fell on it. She didn't move toward it right away, instead she froze. For a full second her body stiffened, and her eyes seemed to forget the room, forget him, forget everything around her, as if they had suddenly traveled through time and landed in a darker place. Then, without warning, she rushed over and grabbed the box with both hands, holding it to her chest like a mother shielding her child from fire. "Please," she whispered, breath short and shaking. "You must forget you saw this." Keanu didn't speak right away. He stepped back, hands open to show he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to pry," he said slowly. "I was just helping with the closet, but what is it, Milena? Why does it scare you so much?" Her hands trembled around the edges of the box, her knuckles pale and tight. She looked down, then slowly back up at him, eyes filling with water that never quite became tears. "This box is my past," she said. "It should have stayed buried." Keanu saw something in her then, something too deep for words. It wasn't just pain. It was the weight of survival, the kind that forces you to smile while carrying invisible wounds. He didn't press her further. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, watching as she gently placed the box under the cleaning cart, covering it with a sheet before returning to her work like nothing had happened. But nothing was the same anymore. Not for him. And certainly not for her. They worked together in a heavy silence for the next 20 minutes. Each room they cleaned carried the rhythm of routine, but the air between them had changed. Something unsaid lingered between the movements, between the sound of sprayed cleanser and the rustle of fresh linen. Keanu could feel it. Milena wasn't just a tired cleaning lady. She was running from something, or maybe toward something. Either way, that box was the center of it, and now it was here, in his world, disrupting what should have been just another quiet evening. Finally, as they reached the last room on the floor, Milena sat down on the edge of the bathtub and let out a long sigh. Her shoulders sagged in defeat, her hands folding together in her lap. "You want to know what's in the box?" she said, more a statement than a question. Keanu nodded, not out of curiosity but out of care. "Only if you want me to know." She looked up at him, and for the first time her eyes softened. "You have been kind. Not like the others. Most people look past me, like I'm not even there. But you see people. I can tell." He didn't speak, allowing her the space to go on. Milena reached into her uniform and pulled out a thin metal key tied to a string around her neck. She untied it slowly, as if every movement weighed 100 pounds. "When I came to this country," she began, her voice distant and low, "I had nothing but my son. We were fleeing violence, war, things too ugly to say out loud. We ended up in a shelter downtown. I found this job to feed him. It paid little, but I was grateful. Every week, I'd hide what little money I could save inside that box. Not just money, documents, letters, things from home, things that matter. Keanu leaned forward, listening closely. But then, one night, he disappeared. My boy. Gone without a sound. Police said he ran away, but I know he didn't. I know. He was only 12. Too young to leave me behind. Too sweet. Too smart. But no one cared. No one looked hard enough. I begged. I cried. I searched the streets. I put up pictures. Nothing. Like he vanished, like he never existed. Her voice cracked now, the pain rising to the surface like old scars splitting open again. I kept the box because it holds everything I have left of him, some clothes, a toy, his school papers. It's all I have, all that proves he was real. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't just sympathy. It was fury. Fury at a world that could abandon people like Milena and her son. Fury at a system that only saw the rich, the loud, the polished. He looked at her and saw something sacred, not broken, but resilient. A mother still holding on to her truth when the world tried to erase it. Do you still believe he's out there? Keanu asked gently. Milena didn't answer right away. Her hands fidgeted with the string that once held the key. Some nights, I feel like he's calling me, like he's trying to come home, but something's in the way, and I can't help him. Keanu stood slowly, then knelt in front of her, looking her directly in the eyes. Milena, if there's even a chance your son is out there, we will find him. I promise you, you're not alone in this anymore. Her eyes widened, stunned not by the promise but by the certainty in his voice. She had grown used to empty kindness, but Keanu's words carried a different weight, like someone who had lost too, someone who understood. But why would you do this? She asked. You're a famous man. You have no reason to help me. Because I'm still a human being, Keanu replied. And because you helped me tonight more than you know. You reminded me what it means to be present. To Kare. As the sun began to rise outside the tall windows coloring the city with a soft glow, Keanu and Milena stood together in that quiet hotel room. Not as guest and cleaner, but as two strangers bound by a new mission. He walked her down to the staff lounge, made her sit, and brought her coffee himself. Then he left her with a single sentence that stayed in her mind like a drumbeat. Get some rest, Milena, because tomorrow we start looking. What Milena didn't know was that Keanu had already made a call. One to a trusted friend with connections deep into missing persons and cold cases. And within minutes, a file from 12 years ago was being pulled from digital shadows. Inside that file were photos. One of them, Keanu would soon recognize, not from television, but from somewhere much closer. The boy's face. The eyes. Something about them looked hauntingly familiar. The investigator Keanu hires finds an unexpected detail. The missing boy's name had appeared in a juvenile record system under a different surname just a year after he disappeared. The listed guardian, a hotel staff member who mysteriously retired the same year. The file that changed everything. The sky outside had barely shifted from dark gray to pale blue when Keanu received the call. He hadn't slept. After returning to his suite, he had sat by the window for hours, staring out over the still city with his phone resting in his hand. Something about Milena's story had rooted itself deeply inside him, not just because of the tragedy, but because of her strength. A mother without power, without voice, yet still holding the line for a child the world had forgotten. The pain in her eyes had been raw, but beneath it was a fire that refused to die. Even after a dozen winters of silence, he had seen the kind of pain that leaves people empty. But Milena was different. She hadn't become bitter, only quieter. And now, she wasn't alone anymore. When the phone finally buzzed, Keanu snapped to attention. It was David, an old friend he trusted more than anyone else in the world. David had once been a lead investigator on high-profile missing person cases, but left the public eye years ago after a political scandal exposed the way elite families could silence justice. He had gone underground helping people quietly. No red tape, no headlines, just truth. Keanu had called in a rare favor and David had responded immediately. "I ran the information you gave me," David said without greeting. "The name, the disappearance, the shelter logs, everything. And you're not going to like what I found." Keanu leaned forward, heart already thudding. "Tell me." "The boy, Ilya Konstantin, right? Milena's son. There's no official record of him after the shelter intake. No school transfers, no hospital visits, no legal adoption paperwork. But there is one flagged anomaly. A juvenile. Record popped up from a group home 2 years after he vanished. Different name. Different birthday. Same face. I used facial mapping to confirm it." Keanu stood now, pacing slowly, his fingers tightening around the phone. "What's the name listed?" "Elliot Jennings. Entered the system through a private youth program that was owned, get this, by a holding company tied to a hospitality chain. The same one that owns the hotel Milena works in." "You think someone in the hotel took him?" Keanu asked, a chill climbing up his spine. "I think someone in power used the system to disappear him. The listed guardian on file was a man named Thomas Vick, a senior operations manager who retired quietly after 40 years of service. No press, no farewell. He vanished the same year Elliot Jennings stopped showing up in group home records. And guess where Thomas was stationed that year? Right here. Same hotel. Different name back then, but same walls." Keanu didn't answer, for a moment. Everything inside him churned with disbelief and anger. This was no longer just about a tired woman he met in the hallway. This was about something bigger, something rotten underneath marble floors and golden chandeliers. "I need everything you have," Keanu said. "Send the file, meet me in person, don't email anything important, too risky." "Already printing it," David replied. "And Keanu, this might get ugly. You sure you want in?" I was in the moment she whispered her son's name like it still belonged to her. By the time Keanu met Milena again, the sun had fully risen, casting soft golden light over the city. She looked different now. Still in her uniform, still tired, but something had shifted in her posture. Maybe it was the way she stood a little taller, or the fact that she was waiting for him outside the employee entrance, coffee in hand, as if she already knew he'd come back. "You didn't have to return," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Keanu replied, taking the coffee gently. "I found something, or rather someone did. I need you to come with me." Milena looked up sharply. "Is it about Ilya?" He nodded. "We don't have answers yet, but we have a path, and we're going to walk it together." He led her to a quiet cafe outside the city, where David was waiting at a table tucked into the corner, a large envelope resting between his hands. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a demeanor that spoke of too many lies uncovered and too many truths buried. When he saw Milena, he stood and shook her hand with surprising warmth. "You're the strongest person I've ever been asked to help," he said simply. Then he slid the envelope toward her. "But this might hurt." Milena opened it slowly. Inside were photos, documents, and a printed file summary. At first, she said nothing. Then she began trembling. This is him," she whispered. "This is my Ilya. But why does it say different name? Different birthday?" David's voice was gentle. "They changed everything to make sure no one could trace him back to you. They erased him from one system and inserted him into another. It's called identity laundering. Cruel, but real. It happens to kids who disappear under strange circumstances, sometimes for money, sometimes for other reasons. I think someone took your boy and hid him where no one would ever look." "But why?" Milena asked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He was just a child. We were poor. We had nothing to offer." Keanu looked at her, eyes dark with understanding. "Sometimes, Milena, the powerful don't need reasons. Sometimes they just act because they can. But they made one mistake. They thought no one would care." David leaned in. I dug deeper. Thomas Vick had a quiet reputation. Clean record. Respected employee. But there's a sealed case in internal records. Harassment claim from a young male employee. Never went to court. The file disappeared. Guess who filed it? A boy named Elliot. Milena's hands flew to her mouth, her body shaking with realization. They hurt him. We don't know that. For sure, David said quickly. But we do know Thomas left suddenly, and the boy disappeared again. I think he ran. I think your son is out there somewhere. Keanu stood. Then we'll find him. But just as hope began to bloom, David's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and his face changed. You won't believe this, he muttered. One of my contacts at a youth shelter sent a tip. A man came in 2 weeks ago asking for old files, described a boy named Ilya, said he might be his brother. No records matched, but they remembered his face. Keanu leaned closer. Do we have a name? David nodded. Only first name. Jennings. Milena gasped. That was the new name, the one they gave him. Keanu's heart pounded. Then we're close. But before they could celebrate, David opened his folder again and placed another document on the table. A surveillance photo. It showed a man in a staff uniform walking through the alley behind the hotel late at night, weeks before the encounter. The photo wasn't clear, but Milena leaned in and turned pale. That's him, she whispered. That's Thomas. He's back. Keanu froze. If Thomas Vick had returned, and if he knew Milena was still working there, then this wasn't over. It had just begun. Keanu receives a mysterious handwritten note slipped under his hotel suite door that night. It simply reads, "Stop digging, or the boy disappears forever." Attached to it is a recent photo of a teenage boy in a subway station. The boy has Ilya's eyes. The warning in the dark. The night returned quietly, slipping over the city like a velvet curtain drawn over glass towers and silent alleys. For most of the world, it was a time to rest, to dream, to retreat. But not for Keanu. And certainly not for Milena. Inside the dimly lit suite, Keanu sat motionless, holding the note in one hand and the photo in the other, his jaw clenched and his thoughts spinning. The note was handwritten in black ink on simple paper. No name, no signature, no hint of where it came from. Just a clear and chilling warning. Stop digging, or the boy disappears forever. And then there was the photo. A recent one. It showed a teenage boy at a subway station, his head down, a backpack slung over one shoulder, shadows falling across his face. But even in the blur, the eyes were unmistakable. Wide, alert, filled with the kind of tired that only comes from running too long. It was Ilya. Keanu stared at the photo for several minutes, every fiber of his body alive with urgency. Someone was watching them. Someone who knew what they were doing and how close they were getting. The message wasn't just a threat. It was proof. Ilya was alive, and someone had eyes on him. But what made Keanu's blood run colder wasn't the threat itself. It was the implication that the person behind it was still nearby, still connected, and possibly inside the hotel. He immediately picked up the phone and called David, who answered. On the first ring, "Someone knows," Keanu said, voice low and sharp. "They left a note under my door. It's real, they're watching. And they sent a photo of Ilya." David's silence on the other end was heavy. Then he exhaled. "Send me a picture of it. I'll run facial enhancement and see if we can locate the subway station. There may be cameras in the area. This is no longer just a missing persons case, it's an active threat. We're on borrowed time." Keanu snapped a photo of the note and the picture and sent them immediately. Then he went down to find Milena, who was back in her janitor uniform, cleaning the second-floor hallway with her head down and shoulders stiff. When she saw him approach, she forced a smile, but her eyes were heavy, as if her soul hadn't slept in years. "You should be resting," Keanu said gently. "I can't rest until I know," she replied without looking up. "My hands must keep moving or my mind will fall apart." He stepped closer, taking the rag from her trembling hand. "Milena," he said softly, "someone sent me a photo of Ilya tonight. He's alive." She gasped, her knees nearly giving out as she clutched the wall for support. You saw him?" Not in person, but yes. It's recent, a subway station somewhere in the city, and someone doesn't want us finding him. She closed her eyes, whispering something in her native tongue, prayer perhaps, or a plea. Then she looked up and her expression hardened. Then we don't stop. Even if they try to scare us, I will not let them keep him one more day. They met David in a small office space the next morning, rented just outside the city limits to avoid hotel eyes and ears. He had already enhanced. The subway photo and the background signage confirmed it was taken at a station near the old garment district, an area riddled with abandoned warehouses, street kids, and unlicensed shelters. Not the safest place to be, but exactly the kind of place a runaway would hide. The timestamp puts this photo at 2 nights ago, David explained. Security footage confirms the boy exited the station and headed west on foot. He was alone, no sign of anyone following him, but that doesn't mean they weren't watching. Milena hovered over the screen, eyes locked on her son's image. I want to go there, she said. I want to see it for myself. Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll go together. They entered the garment district by evening, walking past shuttered factories, graffiti-covered storefronts, and streets that pulsed with a forgotten rhythm. It was a different world here, one where children disappeared and no one asked questions, where landlords locked their own doors early and people slept behind broken windows. But Keanu moved with calm purpose and Milena walked with the strength of a mother whose love had burned through every fear. They found the subway station and retraced the path David had mapped out. Local shopkeepers recognized the boy vaguely. Skinny, kid, quiet, always wearing the same hoodie. But none knew his name. One old man who ran a food stand said the boy sometimes bought soup and sat alone behind the dumpsters. He didn't talk much, the man said, but he always looked like he was listening for something, like he expected someone to find him. Keanu and Milena searched for hours until they came to a run-down shelter with cracked windows and a flickering sign. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and cold metal. A tired woman at the desk looked up, her face lined by time and exhaustion. We're looking for someone, Keanu said carefully. A boy, maybe 15, dark hair, answers to Elliot or Ilya. The woman paused, then nodded slowly. He comes, by sometimes. Never stays. Always says he can't trust shelters. But I give him food. He's quiet, polite, but scared. Milena's voice broke. Can you tell us where he goes after? No, she replied. But he usually shows up, late, just before lights out. He watches us from the alley first, like he's waiting to be sure it's safe. Keanu thanked her, then turned to Milena. We wait, he said. Tonight, here. They hid in a nearby stairwell as night fell. Hours passed. The city sounds faded. The cold crept in. And then, just after midnight, a shadow appeared at the edge of the alley, a thin figure. Hoodie pulled low, backpack on. He moved slowly, cautiously, eyes scanning the shelter. He was about to turn away when Milena stepped forward. Ilya, she said, her voice cracking like glass under pressure. The boy froze. Ilya, it's me, Mama. The silence was unbearable. The boy didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, he dropped the bag and took a single step forward. Keanu stepped out of the shadows, ready to intervene if necessary, but then stopped as he saw the boy's face clearly under the light. It was him. Tears streamed down Milena's cheeks. They told me you were gone, but I knew in my heart. Ilya looked at her, lips trembling. They said you gave me away. Milena fell to her knees. Never. I never stopped looking. They took you. They lied. The boy took another step, closer now. His hands were shaking, and then like a dam breaking, he ran to her, falling into her arms as she wept and held him, rocking him gently like she had when he was just a child. Keanu turned away, swallowing hard, but just then, David's voice buzzed through Keanu's earpiece. We've got a problem. Someone was watching the shelter from across the street. They just took off in a black van. I think Thomas Vick is trying to erase loose ends. Keanu's body tensed. He looked at Milena and Ilya, still holding each other. "We have to move," he said. "Now." As they flee through the night, Keanu's car is forced off the road by a dark vehicle. He pulls Milena and Ilya out just in time. But when he turns back toward the road, the van's driver steps out, Thomas Vick, holding something in his hand that changes everything. The man in the shadows, the tires screamed as Keanu yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, narrowly avoiding a direct collision with the black van that had emerged from the side street like a predator pouncing on prey. The sedan he was driving jolted violently as it skidded through the gravel, bouncing over a curb before grinding to a halt near a deserted industrial loading dock. Milena clutched Ilya in the back seat, shielding him instinctively with her body, as broken glass from the cracked side mirror showered over them. Keanu threw the door open and shouted for them to get out. "Go, behind the pallets now!" he barked. There was no time for questions, only action. He could already hear the hum of the van's engine slowing as it parked across from them. Headlights extinguished, swallowed by shadows. Milena and Ilya scurried behind a stack of wooden shipping crates, crouching low and holding their breath. Keanu remained in front of the car, eyes scanning the darkness, feet planted firmly as he braced for whatever came next. The silence that followed was almost worse than the crash. Thick, unnatural. A silence that meant someone was watching, waiting. Then the van door opened. Slowly, methodically, a tall figure stepped out. His movements were deliberate, his silhouette etched against the faint flicker of a distant street lamp. Keanu's breath caught the moment he recognized him. Thomas Vick. Older now, heavier, but the same cold posture, the same rigid shoulders, and in his right hand something glinted beneath the pale light. It wasn't a weapon. Not exactly. It was a worn leather notebook. Thomas walked forward a few paces, then stopped just short of the car's ruined front bumper. He looked at Keanu, for a long moment before speaking, his voice low, dry, and filled with smug confidence. "You should have left this alone." Keanu didn't flinch. "You should have never touched that boy." Thomas chuckled, the sound bitter and empty. "You think this is about one boy? This was never about him. This is about you stepping into something you don't understand." Keanu stepped forward slowly, his stance calm but commanding. "Then explain it, go ahead. Because as far as I see, it's a coward standing in the dark, holding a book full of lies." Thomas lifted the notebook slightly, then flipped it open with practiced ease. "This book," he said, "contains everything. Names, payments, transfers. The way certain shelters and hospitality chains were encouraged to relocate inconvenient children. It's all in here. And you're just the loudest man to stumble into it." Keanu's jaw tightened. "You sold children." Thomas shrugged, unbothered. "Don't be dramatic. We placed them, to people who needed heirs, to families who wanted silence. It wasn't pretty, but it was profitable. And for a while, it worked. Until Milena came back," Keanu said. Thomas sneered. "She was supposed to quit. She was broken, silent, perfect, but then she stayed, and then you noticed. And now here we are." Keanu glanced sideways, just long enough to see Milena and Ilya watching from behind the crates. Milena's face was pale, trembling, but her eyes were fierce, the kind of fierce that comes from a mother too tired to be afraid. "You can't bury this anymore," Keanu said. "You're done." Thomas raised the notebook slightly, then surprised Keanu by tossing it across the hood of the car. It landed with a thud. "Take it," he said. "Read it. Expose me if you want. But it won't matter, because there are 10 more like me, and they're higher than you can reach." Keanu stared at the book, then back at Thomas. "Maybe. But you're going to fall first." And then, from the shadows, a second car's headlight switched on. David's. He had arrived silently, parked at an angle, and now stepped out with his phone raised, already streaming. "Thank you for the confession," David said. "The camera heard every word." Thomas turned, face twisting in rage. "You!" But before he could move, David whistled, and two unmarked officers emerged from the second vehicle. They weren't hotel security. They weren't local beat cops. They were federal, wearing discreet jackets and hard expressions. Within seconds, Thomas was on the ground, restrained, yelling threats no one was listening to anymore. Keanu walked over to Milena and Ilya. "It's over," he whispered. Milena sobbed, falling to her knees as she wrapped her arms around her son. "No, it's not over," she said. "It's just beginning." The following days moved like a whirlwind. The notebook contained enough to spark a national investigation. Hidden transfers, falsified identities, secret housing networks disguised as youth programs. Multiple hotels and shelters were implicated. Names began to surface, quietly at first, then louder as journalists got hold of leaked documents. Arrests followed, subpoenas, resignations. A silent empire of shadows collapsed beneath the weight of truth. But for Milena, none of that mattered more than the boy beside her. Ilya, now 16, withdrawn and cautious, stayed close to her at all times. It would take time, counseling, and more love than one heart should be expected to give, but she was ready. And she wasn't alone anymore. Keanu stayed with them throughout the process. He didn't just pay for their housing. He sat in waiting rooms. He brought home-cooked food. He read to Ilya when the boy couldn't sleep. And, slowly, day by day, Ilya began to open up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But one night he leaned against Keanu on a quiet park bench and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Keanu didn't answer right away. He just placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and nodded, his throat too tight to speak. But even as peace began to settle in, another letter arrived. This one in a plain envelope tucked beneath Keanu's windshield wiper. No threats, no name, just a single line written in a shaky hand. "You exposed one gate. There are more, and one of them leads to a face you trust." Keanu stared at the letter long after the sun had risen. Something deep in him stirred. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. This battle was not over. Milena receives a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end is soft, calm, and terrifyingly polite. "We've lost Thomas, but we've gained something better. We know where your other child is." But Milena only had one child, or so she thought. The child in the silence. It was early morning and the sun had barely broken through the clouds when Milena's phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. She was making breakfast. Nothing extravagant. Just eggs and tea. When she glanced at the caller ID. The number was unknown. No location. No name. Something in her chest tightened. There had been too many anonymous voices in her life. Still something. Curiosity. Instinct. Maybe dread. Made her pick it up. "Hello?" she asked quietly. For a moment, silence answered her. Then a calm, even voice came through the receiver. Male, precise and terrifying in its politeness. "Milena, I see you've reunited with your son. Congratulations." Her blood turned cold. "Who is this?" "Someone who believed in the system Thomas built. Someone who watched it fall apart, under your noise and Keanu's meddling. But I'm not calling about him. I'm calling about the one you left behind." Milena's knees buckled. "What do you mean? You always thought you had only one child. But that was never true." The voice paused, letting the silence tighten around her like a noose. "You were pregnant when you fled your home country," he continued. "You were unconscious when the smugglers brought you across the border. You gave birth in the shelter. They told you the baby didn't survive. But he did. They sold him. And now, we have him." Milena collapsed into the nearest chair, breathless, shaking, unable to process the words crashing around her like broken glass. "You're lying," she gasped. "I would remember." "No," the voice said, softer now. "You remember what they let you remember. We deal in shadows, and your memories were shaped by pain, by exhaustion, by trauma. You were told a story, and now you live in its ruins." The line went dead. Milena sat there for what felt like hours, unmoving, her tea gone cold, the smell of burned eggs filling the air. It was Ilya's voice that finally pulled her back. "Mama, are you okay?" She turned slowly, trying to smile, but her face crumpled before she could hide it. I just got a call. They said I had another child. That you had a brother." Ilya stood frozen. Then slowly he moved toward her, his hand reaching for hers. "Is it true?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But if there's even a chance, I have to find out." Within an hour, they were at Keanu's door. He had just returned from a night shoot but opened the door the second he heard her voice. One look at her face, and he knew something had changed. She told him everything. The call, the words, the revelation she didn't know whether to believe or fear. Keanu listened carefully, then nodded. "If it's true," he said quietly, "then we start over. From the beginning. We go deeper. And this time we don't stop." They went back to David, who was already tracing leads from the notebook Thomas had left behind. David, exhausted but determined, confirmed the possibility. "There was one undocumented child processed the same week Milena entered the States," he said, pointing at a redacted file buried under layers of hidden entries. "Infant. No mother listed. Vanished from records after a private medical intervention entry. The file leads to a clinic. It was real. But the owner? Connected to the same shell companies tied to the child placement rings." Milena stared at the screen, numb. "I want to go there. I need to see it." The clinic was no longer operating under its old name. Now it was a wellness center in a polished part of town. Gleaming glass, smiling staff, walls that smelled of lavender and distraction. Keanu walked in beside Milena like a quiet force of nature, dressed simply but commanding respect with every step. They asked for patient records. The receptionist smiled sweetly and declined. Keanu leaned in just enough to be heard but not noticed. "We know what happened here," he said calmly. "You can either help us or wait for the news vans to arrive." It took 20 minutes and 3 tense conversations. But finally, a file was placed on the table, sealed, incomplete, but real. Inside was a photo. A newborn with a birthmark under his left eye, something Milena immediately recognized. "He's mine," she whispered, her hands trembling. The file included a date, a transfer code, and a location, a private boarding institute in Vermont. The child had been placed there under a guardianship program meant to provide elite education to gifted orphans. But what no one knew was that this place had served as a laundering point, where names were changed, identities rewritten, and children prepared for a life that did not belong to them. Keanu chartered a flight that afternoon. Milena, Ilya, and David went with him. The journey was quiet, heavy with anticipation and fear. None of them knew what they'd find. When they arrived, the institute stood at the edge of a forest, built like a grand estate, its beauty hiding a grim past. The headmaster was new, kind, surprisingly cooperative, and led them to the archives without protest. "I've read the reports," he said quietly. "I wasn't here then. But what happened under the last director? I believe you deserve the truth." They found the file in the basement vault. The boy had been named Jonathan. He had tested off the charts in spatial reasoning and problem solving. He had run away twice, returned both times by contracted security. Then, 3 years ago, he left again, and this time, he vanished. Milena's heart broke all over again. "Do you have any photos?" she asked. The headmaster nodded and returned minutes later with a folder. Inside was a photo of a boy, maybe 13, thin but alert, his face half turned toward the camera. Milena gasped. "Ilya," she whispered, turning to her son. "He looks just like you." Ilya stared at the photo, silent, then slowly smiled. "I always thought I heard someone in my dreams. A voice. Maybe it was him." Keanu took the photo and turned it over. There, scribbled in pencil, was a phrase. It wasn't English. It was in Milena's native language. She translated it aloud, barely breathing. "If I'm ever found, tell my mother I still remember the sky she sang about. Keanu and David exchanged glances. That sentence was too specific to be coincidence. It was real. And he was still out there. They began searching again. New name, new city. David tapped into youth homeless networks, runaway shelters, and even old-school ID photos. 3 days later, a match came in. A teenager had been seen in Montreal, helping with construction under a different name. No known family, fluent in multiple languages, solitary but kind. Keanu looked at Milena. "We go now?" She nodded, eyes shining with fresh hope. They found him on the 5th day, working with a group of volunteers rebuilding homes for displaced families. He wore a cap, kept to himself, and didn't smile much. But when Milena stepped forward and softly whispered the words from the photo, "The sky I sang about," he turned, stared at her, and slowly began to cry. Jonathan, or whatever name he had lived under, fell into her arms without a word. Ilya stood nearby, unsure, but when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. They didn't need history or paperwork. They knew. They were brothers. And Keanu? He just stood back, watching the reunion, his hands in his pockets, his heart full. Sometimes the world breaks people. Sometimes it scatters them like leaves in a storm. But sometimes it gives you the strength to gather them again. Not with power. Not with fame. Just with kindness. Just by being the one who cared. Enough to stop and say, "You matter."